So one of the key lessons of the war is how air defenses are still an extremely lethal and therefore important asset for any countries, both whether they are in the offense or whether they are in the defense. Doesn't make a difference. They are still absolutely critical. In the case of Russia, we saw it because lack of air coverage in the early phase of the war exposed its columns of tanks to detection, and in some cases like damage or destruction by airborne assets, like famously the Turkish TB2 drones. And in the case of Ukraine, this has been pretty obvious from the day one of the war. Air defenses allowed Ukraine to reduce the effectiveness first, and then to, I would say, impede Russian air forces to essentially operate with impunity. That is, to penetrate Ukrainian airspace and carry out strikes or provide intelligence about potential targets and so forth. And then when the war started kind of slowing down, like the Russian invasion kind of retrenched towards the Donbass and Crimea, and the kind of number, the frequency and intensity of missile attacks increased dramatically. Air defense is exactly the same technology of missile defense, and so it played a key role in avoiding civilian casualties and destructions. Electronic warfare, as I would say, it has been the case since over the past 50 years, and probably since World War II, has played an extremely important role. Now, to those who are not familiar, what is electronic warfare? Is the use of the electromagnetic spectrum. That might sound very kind of niche or something inaccessible to the most. In fact, all of us are very familiar with the electromagnetic spectrum, even though we don't know. So visible light is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. X-rays are part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Radio waves are part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So this is all those frequencies that travel in a straight line, like visible light, and that can be used for both long-range detection, communications, identification of targets, and much more. And of course, radar, laser, and as I was saying, radio waves as well. So for communications, these use the electromagnetic spectrums at different frequencies for multiple purposes. Of course, the key advantage of all these systems I just mentioned, communications and radar, is that they have very long range. So we know radio, for example, radar is the same. Ground-based radars have a range that goes up to 400 kilometers. So these allow air defenses to have significant time for interception. So being able to detect the target at 400 kilometers away allows the defender to plan and decide how to best intercept an incoming missile or aircraft so as to maximize the probability of interception. Because of that, denying your enemy the capacity of using the electromagnetic spectrum is very, very important, because you reduce the time it has available, at its disposal to intercept a missile or an aircraft, or you impede real-time communication. So all these communication, as I said, so they are part of the electromagnetic spectrum, therefore they travel at the speed of light. So this is 300,000 kilometers per second, like super fast. Of course, this is why warfare is so lethal, because you can provide in real-time information about a moving target to a platform that is very far away for precision targeting. But of course, if you impede your enemy to acquire this information, you slow down the process, or if you interfere, things get more complicated. And in a war, like we are in the age of real-time communications, and this is why electromagnetic warfare is very important, because of course it plays a role not only with interference, but also with the counter-interference. That is, you develop your radars and communication systems so as that they are resistant to jamming, spoofing, and any type of attempt by your enemy to intercept. We do know that both countries have invested and employed extensively electronic warfare systems. For example, Russia has been using jammers, so GPS, sort of satellite kind of signals on which some munitions rely for accurate targeting. And so by interfering with these jammers, these systems that essentially they send a radio frequency, a radio signal in the same frequency of the satellite signals that is used by these munitions for identifying, for following, for targeting precisely the objective. So by doing that, they significantly degrade the accuracy of these munitions. And similar, we know both for like high-end drones as well as for low-end drones, both countries have been using different types of electronic warfare systems, both sometimes radars or systems that detect the source of the radio signal so as to identify where the drone pilot is and therefore then strike the piloting positions, as well as systems for just basic interference. So again, you send back a signal that is modulated on the same frequency of the radio command, and in this way the radio operator loses control of the drones, and the drones may fall or may not be able, or you may gain control of the drones. It's very difficult to say which country is more advanced. Like Ukraine, since the start of the war, has been using mostly Soviet legacy air defense systems and therefore communication systems. So that probably gave an advantage to Russia in the sense that it knew how these systems work. And knowing how they work is very, very important then to be able to jam them or to interfere with them. But we also know that Ukraine has a really advanced industrial base, especially in radar and communications. Before the war, I assume now it has been relocated, there was a very important institute in Kharkiv, apologies for the mispronunciation, that was working with radar. So there was reason to believe people working there have been playing a very important role in updating, modifying these systems. So probably both countries have had an advantage at different times. Limited access to some components might at some point kind of limit further the capacity of Russia. That's what we can conjecture. The more radars and air defenses, the better, because it's always important to keep in mind that all these systems have range limitations. 400 kilometers for a radar is very long, but generally aircraft fly at very low altitude, therefore you can detect it with ground-based radars only much later. And therefore, if you consider a circle around you that is a circle in which you can detect a system, then you understand there can be many gaps in coverage. And this is true for radars, but it's also true for munitions, whether it's missiles or artillery. Artillery has a way, way shorter range than missiles. So the more you have, the more overlapping coverage you can provide. And in this way, you really minimize the probability that missiles or aircraft can break through. So that's definitively, I would say, for a country at war, there's never enough of them. And also, because any batteries has a limited stock, and recharging them, putting back missiles is not something that you can do in a couple of minutes. It takes some time. As along the same line, systems for electronic warfare interference, electronic warfare, and along the same lines for reliable communications. These are all systems that the more you have, it's always the better. Of course, you need to have personnel then that use it. Ukraine has shown that it can gain proficiency in fairly short time. So as of now, I suspect this should not be a problem. I don't have hard data about it. And then it's difficult to say, but paradoxically protecting also, so providing munitions for artillery is, even though we are no longer in the realm of air defense, but this is central, because we do know in some areas Ukraine is kind of limiting the amount of artillery shells it uses. And, you know, if the positions can hold, or if they are way less effective, the role of air power becomes much less important. That is, if Russia manages to make advances, all the kind of victories in the sky become much less important. So it's really, really important to make sure that on the land kind of domain, Russia doesn't make any advance. And I forgot to mention, absolutely, long-range missiles are really, really important for logistics. We know it with HIMARS, how Ukraine managed to strike a long-range, very important targets, sometimes killing command and control, so very high-ranking military personnel of Russia were killed in kind of together with many others in single strikes, as well as fuel depots, arms depots. Long-range missiles do allow essentially Ukraine to change, instead of fighting in the trenches or instead of fighting in cities like Bakhmut, you kind of bring the war like much farther from the front, as easing the pressure on the front, because munition does arrive, or to arrive it takes much longer, it's much more difficult. Same with personnel. If you strike specific buildings, you limit the number of troops that might arrive at some given front. Of course, we should make no illusions. As will happen with HIMARS, Russia can always make countermeasures. So it's not that these missiles arrive and magically things go well. They're like war is fought on multiple fronts, and there are the enemy always has a vote, as an American general at one point said about Iraq. But of course, the more you make it difficult for your adversary, the better it is for you. So definitively, long-range missiles of any type, I would say these, especially in scale, because it's very different if Ukraine can strike occasionally high-value targets, even within Russia, but this is something that is not systematic. The capacity of doing it at scale is completely different. F-16 by themselves would not change kind of the advance, because we know the advances by Ukraine has been made very difficult by fortification of defenses by Russia. So we have all these kind of very detailed pictures of multi-mine fields with both anti-personnel, anti-tank mines, ditches to impede tanks to proceed at sustained speed, as well as there's this dragon's teeth, this kind of chain block of kind of cement or heavy metal cement, further slowing down, plus the availability of sensors that detect any minor movement, so allow artillery to strike in precision. So I would say the F-16 would not be able to kind of overcome this key barrier that Ukrainian forces have encountered. But they would definitively help. First of all, with air defense, so incoming missiles and aircraft, they would be one more asset that Ukraine can use to intercept incoming missiles and aircraft. And so this will kind of lower a bit the pressure on air defenses, both fixed air defense systems, mobile defense systems. We know we have these stories of Ukrainian armed forces kind of on trucks and kind of speeding up and down on a given area to really intercept with short range, low altitude guns or missiles, incoming missiles. So having jet fighters would essentially give more opportunity. As I said earlier, you detect an incoming missile or aircraft at long range, and then you can decide what is the best way to intercept it. And if you have also an option that so far Ukraine is a very small quantity, we know Ukraine had already a very, like in comparison to Russia, very small air force. And of course it has lost many aircraft. We don't know precisely how many, but increasing the number of available jet fighters would be a big advantage. And then but of course, if an advance happens, having aircraft that can provide closer support to the troops, that would definitively help. So that is something that is very important to keep in mind.